Orchestrated entirely new story with fresh characters, Pittsburgh setting and emotional beats. Orchestrated entirely new story with fresh characters, Pittsburgh setting and emotional beats. The lights at the get-go on Penn Avenue buzzed overhead like something trapped, and the rain outside had that thin October meanness to it, the kind that doesn't fall so much as hang. Levi Crandall stood third in line with his last 20 folded small in his jacket pocket and a layoff slip folded smaller in the other. Up at the register, a woman in a good gray coat was trying her card for the third time. The reader blinked red again. She had a dead phone in her hand, a cheap charger, and a bottle of water on the counter, and a voice that was working much too hard to sound like nothing was wrong. The clerk said he was sorry. Levi stepped up and laid the 20 flat next to her things. "For her stuff," he said. "Keep whatever's left." He was out the door before she could turn all the way around. If you've ever given away something you couldn't spare and told yourself you'd figure the rest out later, stay with this one. What happens to Levi over the next 3 weeks is going to be hard to believe. The drive from the warehouse in Braddock back up to Lawrenceville should have taken 25 minutes. He made it in 19. The Chevy had 210,000 on it, and a tick in the front end he'd been promising himself he'd look at since spring. And he sat in it a minute after he killed the engine. Parked behind the brick row house on Carnegie Street, listening to the rain on the roof and the metal cooling. Then he folded the layoff slip one more time along a crease it already had and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and he went up. Mabel was at the kitchen table with a pencil and the deep frown she saved for fractions. 8 years old, dark hair like her mother's, one sock on. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, Bug, how's the math treating you?" "Mrs. Oakake says I keep flipping the numbers." "Numbers flip back. That's the whole point of them." She almost smiled. He set his lunch cooler by the sink and went down the short hall to the bedroom and pushed the folded slip to the back of the bottom dresser drawer, under a stack of Marin sweaters he'd never managed to give away. His hand stayed on the cool wood a second too long. And there she was. August, 3 summers back, the window open and a Pirates game low on the radio, Marin laughing at him for ruining a grilled cheese, telling him he was a hazard near a stove. Then the part that always came right behind it, uninvited, the floor of the ER at Allegheny General, a resident who stopped mid-sentence when the numbers on the screen changed, the long, flat quiet after. An aneurysm, they said. Nothing he could have caught, nothing anybody could have. Then a morning 2 weeks later, him alone in front of the bathroom mirror, making a promise to no one but the glass. "I'll be home. Whatever else, I'll be home." Then Mabel, 5 years old, her hand in his, walking through the doors of the elementary on Butler Street for the first time. He'd cried in the truck after her. She hadn't cried at all. He came back to himself, shut the drawer, and went to put on water for pasta. He checked the banking app while she finished her worksheet. $61 and change, rent in 18 days. The severance, what little there was, would clear in a week if the office got it in on time, which they wouldn't promise. Run cold, the math was tight. Not impossible yet, but tight enough that he didn't run it twice. "Dad?" "Yeah, Bug. Can we do waffles tomorrow?" He opened the fridge, 4 eggs, an inch of milk, a jar of apple butter from Marin's aunt up in Erie. "We can do waffles tomorrow." They ate spaghetti out of a box he'd bought weeks ago, watched 15 minutes of a show about deep-sea fish that glowed, and she brushed her teeth without being told. She let him braid her hair badly before bed, the way she always did, because she said his bad braid made her look like she'd been in a fight and won. After she was down, he turned off the kitchen light and lay on the couch in his clothes and looked at the ceiling. He kept hearing the woman at the counter, not what she'd been buying. The way her voice had pushed too hard against the shake in it. He knew that sound from the inside. He'd had it himself 3 years ago in a kitchen that didn't exist anymore, telling a 5-year-old that her mom wasn't coming home. Some sounds you never stop recognizing. The Monday after, Iris Whitfield drove back to the get-go on Penn. She told herself she'd slept badly because of the audit, the board, the 11 calls she hadn't returned. She knew, in the part of herself she kept quiet, that wasn't the whole of it. She asked the clerk if there was footage. He recognized her from a photo in the business section and pulled it up on the back office monitor without making a thing of it. She watched 40 seconds. A man in a worn canvas jacket steps to the counter, lays down a folded bill, leaves without looking at her. The lot camera caught the tailgate of his truck pulling out. There was a magnetic sign half peeled off the door, Mun Valley Freight. By 2 that afternoon, she was standing in a dispatch trailer on the riverside in Braddock, talking to a foreman in a Carhartt vest, who answered her because she'd walked in like a woman accustomed to answers. Crandall, loader, second shift, cut him loose Thursday, whole round of layoffs, good hand, quiet, why? He left something at a gas station, I'd like to return it. The foreman looked at her the way men look when they decide not to be curious. I don't hand out home addresses, ma'am. Sorry about that. She thanked him and went back to the car. The gas station camera had given her a clean plate. Her assistant, Frances Bellamy, needed 9 minutes with it. Carnegie Street, 6 o'clock. The sky had gone the color of a nickel. She knocked. He opened the door and went very still. She held out his 20, folded the same small way he'd folded it, and a thick white envelope beside it. I wanted to bring this back, she said, and give you this. It was a gift. You don't return gifts, so keep it. It wasn't a gift, you didn't have it to give. I gave it, that makes it mine to give. She didn't put the bill away, but she didn't push it on him again either. And this, she said, lifting the envelope, I really don't need. It isn't charity, it's a thank you. It's still a thank you I don't want. She held his eyes a beat, then set the envelope on the porch rail and turned to go, the folded 20 still in her hand. She'd made it down 2 steps when she stopped. The front window was lit from inside. From where she stood, she could see past his shoulder, a slice of living room, a couch that had come from somebody else's house first, a small jacket over a chair, and on the wall, in a plain black frame, a photograph. A younger version of the man at her feet in a dark suit, at a podium shaking a hand and accepting something. A banner behind him she couldn't read, except for 2 words she could. Pension defense. She stood there for 3 full seconds and let nothing move in her face. Then she walked back up the steps and knocked again. He opened. I forgot to thank you, she said. She held his eyes one steady moment. Something behind hers had shifted and was no longer where it had been a minute before. And Levi, who had never been a fool, saw it land. She went back down, got into the Range Rover, and when the taillights reached the corner, he picked up the envelope. No cash inside, a heavy card embossed, Iris Whitfield, Chief Executive Officer, Whitfield Hollis Capital. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, when you're ready. He took it in and opened his laptop at the kitchen table and typed her name. The first result was an obituary, 4 months old. Bennett Whitfield, 71, founder, sudden heart failure. He read it once, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark a long time. She didn't call for 3 days. He thought about it almost without stopping, and told himself he wasn't thinking about it at all. Thursday, his phone rang at 10 in the morning. He was stacking pallets at a different warehouse. A one-day favor an old supervisor had thrown him out of something like pity. He stepped behind the dock to answer. There's a coffee place on Butler, the one with the green awning. 3 o'clock, if you don't come, I won't ask you again. He came. She was already at a small table by the window when he walked in, gray coat, no jewelry, her watch off, and face down on the table next to her cup, which he understood without being told. He sat. He ordered black coffee and held it in hands that the warehouse had chapped raw. She didn't waste a minute on small talk. A firm called Meridian Crossbridge has been working my board for 4 months to spin off our legacy fund. 9,000 retired mill and transit workers across western Pennsylvania, most of them in their 70s. The fund carries a healthcare rider, that's the part that matters. Meridian wants the thing broken up and sold to 3 different buyers. They'll tell you it's shareholder value. What it actually is that the structure has a soft spot they think they can pry open. What soft spot? An audit trigger, the exact kind somebody laid out in a paper about 8 years ago. She didn't look away when she said it. I need a person who understands that defense down to the bolts. Not lawyers, not my analysts, the man who built it. He drank his coffee. And if I'm not that man anymore, she went on, then I'm offering you 3 weeks, $40,000. Your name on nothing, no filing, no release, non-disclosure both ways. After 3 weeks, whether it works or not, you walk away. He looked out the window. A bus hissed past, throwing up a wing of dirty water. I run a forklift, Ms. Whitfield. Did 7 to 3. I'm home before my kid's bus gets to the corner. I do that on purpose. I'm not that other guy anymore. I'm not going back to being him. She didn't lean in. She didn't plead. She slid her cup toward the center of the table, stood and pulled on her coat. I didn't come to you because you were a director at Ashford Pine in New York. I came because of the man at the gas station. If those are two different people, then I've made a mistake and I apologize for it." She put a 20 on the table. He saw her have to dig for it and she caught him seeing. "Somebody took my wallet at the airport last week. The bank froze my personal accounts pending verification. I don't usually carry cash. I don't usually have to." She walked out. He sat there 10 minutes. When the waitress came back, he paid for both coffees with a 5 and a careful little pile of quarters and dimes, the way a man pays when he's keeping count, and he drove home and didn't say much the rest of the day. Over grilled cheese and tomato soup, Mabel asked if he was sad. "No, Bug. Thinking." "Same thing sometimes," she said. He looked at her a long moment and almost said something and then didn't. That night he read her the part of The Velveteen Rabbit where the old toy explains that being loved hard enough, long enough, is what makes a thing real, even after the fur's been loved clean off. He hadn't understood, before he became a father, how much of what you read aloud to a child turns out to be about loss. He hadn't understood before Marin how grateful he'd be that someone had already found the words so he wouldn't have to. Mabel fell asleep against his shoulder with the book open on his knee. He carried her to bed, tucked the blanket, kissed her hair, and went back out and sat at the kitchen table doing nothing for a while. Then he opened the laptop and typed Meridian Crossbridge Whitfield Hollis. He read for 20 minutes, and the shape of it came up the way a face comes up out of dark water, slowly, then all at once, filings dressed up to look like the worries of small shareholders, a coordinated nudge at the audit committee. 3 letters from concerned institutions inside a 6-week window, timed to force a mandatory review of how the fund was classified. Once the review opened, they'd have their cover to argue the fund had to be sold off under fiduciary stress. It was the playbook. His playbook, damn near to the page of the one he'd warned about, in a paper he'd written 6 months before Marin got sick, written because he'd watched the same move land once before, in 2014, against a smaller fund outside Youngstown. That one had lost. 1,100 retired steelworkers had lost a medical supplement inside a year, and one of them had been a man his own father had carried a hod beside for 30 years, and his father had called him, plain and quiet, to ask how a thing like that was allowed to happen. He sat at the window a long time after he closed the laptop. He did the arithmetic he didn't want to do. 9,000 people. Say the fund got split and sold the way Meridian wanted, the secondary buyers wouldn't be bound to keep the medical writer. Inside 9 months, maybe sooner, 9,000 people would open a letter and learn that the thing they'd been promised was gone. In his old life he'd done that math 100 times and it had stayed abstract. It wasn't abstract anymore. He waited until 7 the next morning and called the number on the back of the card. She picked up on the second ring. "I'll listen," he said. "I'm not promising you anything past that, but I'll listen." A small breath on the other end, not quite relief, something steadier than relief. "Thank you, Saturday morning, I'll send the address." She hung up. He went to the bedroom and opened the top drawer and took out a flat wooden box he hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside, a fountain pen, black and gold, that Marin had given him the morning he made director. Heavy, expensive, the kind of thing she'd saved for. In secret, he held it in his palm 2 seconds. He didn't fill it. He set it back and closed the lid. Then he went and made his daughter waffles. "Are you going to work today?" she asked. "A different kind of work, just for a few weeks." "Is it a good kind?" "I think it might be." The 4th floor of the Whitfield Hollis building on the corner of Liberty and 6th downtown had a conference room with no name on the door, a keypad, and a code that very few people knew. On Saturday at 7, Levi walked into a room like that for the first time in 3 years and change. Iris was already there, and so was an older woman in a charcoal blazer, silver hair cut close, reading glasses on a thin chain. "Levy, this is Frances Bellamy. She's been with my family 29 years. There is nothing in this company she doesn't see, and nothing she carries that she didn't earn the right to carry. She knows you're here. No one else in this building does." Frances put out her hand. Her grip was light and dry. "Mr. Crandall, a pleasure." He didn't know her. He was sure he'd never met her. He shook her hand and said the pleasure was his. What he didn't know, what she didn't say, was that years ago she'd been one of 17 analysts on his pension team at Ashford Pine, back when her hair was brown, and that the man at the head of that table had barely looked up at any of them because all of him had been pointed at the thing he was building. She didn't expect him to remember. She hadn't been hired here on the strength of that history. She'd been hired 24 years ago on the strength of her own. She poured him coffee and sat at the end of the table. Iris pushed 3 black binders across. Everything we have on Meridian's filings, everything on our own risk classifications, everything from the audit committee for the last 14 months. The redactions are mine. Tell me what you need unredacted and I'll pull it. He read for 2 hours. Pen down, no notes in the margins, pages turned at odd intervals and never out of order, the exact way Francis remembered him reading. He stopped twice to look out at the gray river and the bridges, once to drink water. He didn't speak. At the end of the second hour he closed the 3rd binder, set it square on top of the other 2, and looked up. You've got a leak. Iris didn't move. 4 people signed off on document approvals that show up almost word for word in Meridian's filings inside the next 96 hours. None of the 4 had any public reason to know what was in those documents. I'm not going to name anybody yet. I want to confirm one of them before I do. Frances set her cup down on its saucer. The small porcelain click was loud in the room. Take whatever time you need, Iris said very quietly. He stayed 2 more hours. She didn't walk him to the elevator. That night in the storage closet off the kitchen, Levi pulled down a cardboard box he'd labeled in marker 3 years ago and never opened. Inside were 3 things he hadn't been able to throw out and one he'd forgotten he kept. An old Android phone 3 generations behind, the battery long dead. He plugged it in. It woke up slowly the way old phones do. 1 unheard voicemail. April 9th. 4 months back. He pressed play. A man's voice, older, measured, almost apologetic. Mr. Crandall, my name is Bennett Whitfield. I've read your paper 4 times. I'm not asking you to come back to anything. I'm asking you to call me before something happens that I won't be able to undo. My number is... Levi sat on the cold concrete floor of the closet a long time. Bennett Whitfield had died 16 days after leaving that message. At 10 that night, someone knocked on the door of the house on Carnegie Street. He opened it to find Frances Bellamy on the porch with an olive folder under one arm and an apology already in her face. I'm sorry for the hour. May I come in? I won't keep you long. He let her in. She didn't sit until he sat. She set the folder on the coffee table and left it closed. Mr. Crandall, I owe you an introduction I didn't give you this morning. Years ago I worked at Ashford Pine. I was an analyst on your team for 3 months. You won't remember me. There were 17 of us. I'm not telling you for any reason except so you understand I'm not asking you to take what's in this folder on faith. He looked at her, and something he'd been unable to settle since the morning settled into place. I remember the case. I don't remember faces from that year. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you so you know that whatever I've done, I did it from inside this work, not from outside it. She opened the folder. Photocopied pages, organized with the small flag tabs only people who'd spent decades sorting other people's documents know how to place. On the first page, copied from what was plainly a leather notebook in a careful old man's hand, 3 lines. Find Crandall pension angle before Meridian moves. His name was circled twice. Mr. Whitfield was my employer for 29 years, a careful man, a private one. He started writing those words about 4 months before he died. In that window he reached out to 3 restructuring firms. Every one of them had, somewhere in their book, a conflict with Meridian. 2 had taken money from Meridian-linked funds inside the last 5 years, and the 3rd was too close, in his judgment, to people who golfed with Roland Pike. He couldn't trust any of them. Yours was the only clean name on his list. He told me over breakfast that he'd read your paper 4 times and couldn't understand why a man who could write it had walked away. I told him I'd worked for that man once, and I thought I knew. He asked me not to contact you. He wanted to do it himself. She looked at her hands. He called you on April 9th. He died on the 25th. He had no heart condition. He'd passed a full cardiac panel that February. I am not telling you he was murdered, Mr. Crandall. I have nothing that would survive 5 minutes of cross-examination. I'm telling you I don't believe that death was natural. I've lived a long time in rooms where powerful people lose money, and a man at the top of an obstacle dies and the family gets flowers. I'm telling you what I know and what I don't, and I'm leaving the space between them where it belongs, which is in the dark. She closed the folder and slid it across to him. I promised him I'd keep your name out of this until Iris needed it. She needs it now. She stood. Good night, Mr. Crandall. Thank you for the coffee I didn't drink. She let herself out. He sat with the folder in his lap a long time. At 11:40 he called Iris. She picked up on the first ring. They were on the line 31 minutes and spoke during maybe 4 of them. The rest was the small, clean quiet of two people listening to each other not say things. She didn't ask if he was in. He didn't tell her. When they hung up, both of them knew. He came in at 6:30 every morning through the loading entrance off the alley, took the freight elevator to the 4th floor, and worked in the nameless room until 3:45. He was out by 4. He was home every day before Mabel's bus reached the corner of Carnegie and 44th. For 7 days he did almost nothing else. What he built so a person could understand it without a finance degree, because that, he'd decided, was the only kind of armor that held. He moved the legacy fund off the company's own books and into an independent trust run by 3 trustees, 2 actuaries, and a retired federal magistrate. He bound that trust with a single brutal clause. If anyone tried to sell, split, or alter it inside 15 years, the whole asset base would pay out at once, in full, to the 9,000 retirees. There'd be nothing left to carve up. Meridian's entire move depended on fees and resale premiums from a broken fund. This way, all the move would buy them was a check they didn't want to write. He laid in a second wall. Any sale of the fund would need 80% of shareholders to agree, and the Whitfield family. Between Iris and the old holding trusts Bennett's father had set up in the 60s, controlled 47%, with another 19 Bennett had spent 30 years earning. They wouldn't all vote with her out of affection. They'd vote with her here because past 80%, voting any other way became a personal liability nobody wanted to own. And he set a tripwire. If any officer or director signed off on anything touching a sale of the fund without the whole board's consent, a clause fired that stripped them for cause, took their severance, and voided their options. He built that one for a specific signature. On the 4th day, Francis handed him the email logs. 7 outbound attachments over 5 months from the chief operating officer's machine to a Gmail address that 2 shell companies had been set up to hide. Traced the chain back and it ended at a subsidiary wholly owned by Meridian Crossbridge. The 7th attachment was the audit committee's internal risk assessment of the legacy fund, sent 6 days before Meridian's most recent letter, the one that had quoted internal risk assessments by name. Levi didn't call the police. That wasn't the fight in front of him. The fight in front of him was civil and corporate, and it needed a Monday morning board meeting. Friday night at 11 he went up to the 22nd floor to drop the final draft. Bennett Whitfield's office sat at the far end of the corridor, glass on 3 sides, the lights of downtown gathering in the dark below. Iris stood at the window with her back to the door. He came in and set the draft on the desk. She didn't turn. "My father should still be here," she said. He stood 1 step back from her shoulder and didn't touch her. He tried. "That's the only reason I'm standing in this room." She didn't answer for a while. Then, "Go home to your daughter." He went home to his daughter. At midnight his phone buzzed. "I need your signature on 3 documents with a notary present. The notary works Saturdays. I can come to you." 7:30. Fine. He didn't sleep much. At 25 past 7 he was already in the kitchen, old jeans and a worn flannel, the iron warming, a bowl beside the waffle maker. He hadn't stopped to think about whether this was technically his weekend with Mabel. He'd had her every weekend for 3 years. She came down at 7:28 in the bare pajamas she'd talked him into 2 birthdays ago, stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. "Dad, there's a car outside." "I know, Bug, it's a work thing, a nice one." The doorbell rang. Mabel got there first. She opened the door, looked up at the woman on the porch and tilted her head. "You're the lady from the gas station." Iris, who had not been ready for this, went very still. "Dad told me," Mabel said, helpful. "Mostly the part where your phone was dead." "That's the right lady," Iris said. "You should come in, we're doing waffles." Iris came in. The notary, a tired man with a briefcase, showed up 7 minutes later, stamped 3 signatures, took a cup of coffee at the table and left. He'd been in the apartment 9 minutes. After he was gone, nobody moved. Levi set a plate in front of Mabel. He set a plate in front of the chair across from her, where Iris was sitting. He sat down with his own. "Do you like syrup?" Mabel asked. "On top, or in a little dish on the side?" "On top." Mabel nodded, grave, like a suspicion confirmed. "That's the right way." She told Iris about Admiral. Admiral was the turtle in her classroom. Admiral had a chip in his shell shaped like Florida. Admiral did not like a boy named Dax because Dax had once tapped the glass too hard, and you weren't allowed to tap the glass, everyone knew that. Iris listened to all of it. When Levi set down his coffee, he set it down a half-second slower than the time before, and Iris, who happened to be looking right at him, saw it and said nothing. They ate for 40 minutes. Nobody said Meridian. Nobody said Taro. Nobody said bored. Outside the window, the October sun crawled along the brick of the building next door, the careful, ordinary way Saturday sun moves when nothing's wrong. At 9:15, Iris said she had to go. Mabel walked her to the door because Mabel had decided this was the kind of guest you walked to the door. When the Range Rover had gone, Mabel turned around. "Is she coming back tomorrow?" He knelt down so they were eye to eye. "I don't know, Bug, I hope so." He thought about it. "Me too," she said, and ran upstairs to brush her teeth. The board met on the 22nd floor at 10 on Monday. 11 chairs at a long table, an oil portrait of Bennett Whitfield's father on the wall behind the head seat. 9 members, 2 non-voting guests, Roland Pike, holding just over 6% of the voting shares, and Glenn Taro, the chief operating officer. Francis stood at the back with a manila folder and a face that gave away nothing. Iris opened the meeting. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She read 2 short paragraphs into the minutes. The Legacy Fund, as of Friday at 5:41 in the evening, had been transferred in full by valid action under the bylaws into an independent trust run by 3 outside trustees. The structure had been registered with the state at 7/2 that morning. The transfer was lawful. It could not be reversed inside 60 days, and past 60 days only by an 80% supermajority of voting shares. There was a silence. Roland Pike stood, tall, evenly tanned, a man who had clearly rehearsed several versions of a speech on long-term shareholder value. He got 2 words out: "This board." A side door at the back opened, and Levi Crandall walked in. He had on a charcoal suit Iris had it pressed for him without telling him, and a plain shirt he'd ironed himself at 6 that morning. He carried 1 folder. He stopped at the corner of the table nearest the door. Iris didn't look at him. "For the record, I'd like to introduce the architect of the structure I just described. Mr. Levi Crandall, formerly a director of corporate restructuring at Ashford Pine in New York, author of the 2017 paper on trust-based defenses for legacy pension pools." Pike's face didn't move. Levi opened the folder and took out a printed copy of the paper and laid it flat on the table. "I wrote the strategy you're running, Mr. Pike. I also wrote the wall it just hit. Today's the first time I've had both of them in the same room." Pike sat down. Iris nodded once to Francis. Francis walked the length of the room and set the manila folder in front of Glenn Taro. He opened it. He read for 9 seconds. "You have 2 hours to clear your office, Mr. Taro," Iris said very quietly. "The committee will reach you by Friday. You'll sign nothing on this company's behalf before then. Securities in the hall." Taro stood. He didn't say anything. He left with his shoulders very straight and his face very white. Pike, looking at no one, said he'd like to formally withdraw the offer his firm had made on the 11th. "The minutes will reflect that," Iris said. The board adjourned at 10:38. It had taken 36 minutes. 3 weeks to the day after the gas station on Penn Avenue, on a cold, bright Tuesday at the end of October, Iris Whitfield walked Levi Crandall down the executive corridor on the 22nd floor and stopped at the last door, an office that hadn't been used since the 25th of April. She opened it and held out a small ring of keys. "Chief Restructuring Officer, Co-Chief Executive. The board approved it this morning, unanimous, including the 2 who were leaning toward Meridian 6 months ago, including the one who voted against me last spring." He took the keys. "This isn't for the $20, she said. "I know. It's for the fact that you handed it to a stranger on a day the math said you didn't have it to hand over." He went in. He didn't sit at the desk. He walked the edge of the room first, the way a man walks a place he expects to be in a long time. He stopped at the window. He stopped at the shelf, still Bennett's, mostly cleared of books, and crowded with small objects nobody'd had the heart to box up. When he came back to the desk, he opened the top drawer, the reflex of a man taking a seat. Inside, folded small, was a single $20 bill, beside it an index card in her hand, a date, the name of a gas station, nothing else. She'd never spent it. He looked at it for the count of 3. He didn't pick it up. He closed the drawer. He didn't say anything. She, watching from the doorway, didn't either. That afternoon at 3:50, Mabel Crandall came through the lobby doors in a red coat, holding the hand of Frances Bellamy, who had picked her up from the school on Butler Street because Iris had asked her to, and because Frances liked walking children into the doors of important buildings. Iris was waiting. She knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Hi, Mabel." "Hi." Mabel looked at her a long moment with the frank, careful attention 8-year-olds save for guests who count. "Then are we doing waffles again Saturday?" "I'd like that very much. Same syrup rules?" "Same syrup rules," Mabel nodded once, satisfied. Levi stood 2 steps back, watching. When Iris straightened up, the back of her hand brushed the back of his, half a second longer than nothing, and they both looked at the floor for a beat, and neither of them said a word about it, and then the 3 of them walked together toward the elevators. He had handed her his last 20 on a night he couldn't spare it. She had handed him a place to stand on a morning she couldn't have built without him. Neither of them ever said the word for what it was. They'd both learned by then that the things that lasted were almost never the ones that needed saying out loud. "I keep going back to that $20 bill." Levi Crandall folded onto the counter because the whole story turns on it, and it's small enough you could miss it. He didn't have the money. He'd just been laid off. There was a little girl at home and rent 18 days out, and by every sensible measure he should have kept his head down and carried out his own worries. Instead, he covered a stranger's charger and bottle of water and walked into the rain before she could thank him. That one quiet choice, made fast, made when nobody was watching and nobody would have blamed him for doing the easy thing, is the seed everything else grew from. Iris Whitfield didn't go hunting for him because he was brilliant. She went looking because of the man at the gas station. Decency came first, everything came after. But decency alone doesn't save 9,000 retirees from losing their health care. What strikes me is that the same man who gave away his last 20 was also the one mind in 3 states who actually understood the trap Meridian was setting, because years before he'd written the very paper they were using as a blueprint. The kindness opened the door. The knowledge was what let him walk through it and build a wall they couldn't climb. I think we forget how much good a sharp, prepared mind can do when it's pointed at the right problem. Levi didn't shout anybody down at that board table. He just understood the machine better than the people trying to break it, and understanding turned out to be the strongest weapon in the room. And none of it would have held if he'd been a man who quit on hard things. 3 years he raised Mabel alone after Marin showed up for the bus every single afternoon, braided her hair wrong on purpose because it made her feel brave. That's not glamorous work. Nobody hands you keys for it. But it's the proof Iris was really looking for, that he was someone who kept going when going was the only thing left to do. The grit he learned at a kitchen table, doing 2-digit subtraction, was the same grit that got him through 7 brutal days in an unmarked conference room. So when I watch Iris open that drawer at the end and find the 20 she never spent, I don't think the lesson is that good things come back to you. Sometimes they don't. The lesson, for me, is plainer than that. Be the kind of person who does the decent thing when it costs you. Sharpen what you know until it's worth something to somebody, and don't quit on the people who are counting on you. Even when no one's clapping, you won't always get the keys. But you'll become the kind of person they'd trust to hand them to.